Hey, what's going on everybody? Justin here at Trojan War. In this video, we're basically going to be doing my August wrap-up, as in we're doing my NEWTs wrap-up, which took place during the entire month of August. If you guys don't know what that was a really cool readathon hosted by Book Roast. I'll leave her links down below. But it was really cool. There's the different classes. If you took your owls back in an earlier readathon, basically you did harder challenges essentially on an ascending order to try and get even better grades for your NEWTs in those classes. Obviously based kind of like on in the Harry Potter world and stuff. So I thought it was really cool. I didn't quite do as good as I wanted. I think I wanted 20. I believe I got 17 books, which is still really good. But I think I got 7 acceptables, 2 exceeding expectations, and 2 outstandings. So overall, it's still pretty cool, I guess. But just before we begin, I just want to do a cool little plug here. I just opened my Etsy shop, and these are my newest creations right here. I have the Zodiac, basically, individual on each bookmark. And these can be done in either, let's see, we got maple, mahogany, and cherry. And I kind of stain them to look old and rustic and antique and stuff. But I think they're pretty cool. But so there's my Etsy plug. If you want to support me, that'd be pretty cool too. But let's just get started. Alright, so we're going to start with Ancient Runes. And I got an acceptable in that class, and the challenge was to read a book set in the past. And I read The Illustrious Dead by Stephen Talty. The subtitle is The Terrifying Story of How Typhus Killed Napoleon's Greatest Army. It's actually pretty good. I've already done a book review video on this title in particular. I've never really read the Napoleonic era before, but I figured I probably should, since a lot of my Flintlock fantasy books that I read are kind of based on this sort of time in history. So it was definitely enlightening, since I just had a very kind of brief sketch of what was going on. And what this book does is basically details the Grande Armée, which was a giant French army assembled by Napoleon to invade Russia. We all know how that turned out. It was a complete disaster, basically. But the focus of this book was basically to focus on the medicinal and medical sort of aspect of the Grande Armée, especially in dealing with typhus, which was a terrible wasting disease that affected the Grande Armée pretty heavily, and I think the book just did a really good job examining that. So 4 out of 5 stars to The Illustrious Dead. Alright, next up is Arithmancy, and I got an acceptable by reading at least one book with 300 pages, and I read The Wolf, the mystery raider that terrorized the seas during World War I. And this was co-authored by 2 Australian authors, I believe, Richard Gilliatt and Peter Honan. And what this book does is tell the story of the Wolf and his captain, Captain Nerger, of the German army during World War I. And what the Wolf was a German commerce raider. So essentially it was sort of disguised as a merchant, sort of trading vessel. But essentially it was just a battleship destroyer type vessel that laid tons of mines and also captured several ships. I think there's about 24 ships that it can claim as prizes, which is insane. Essentially, it went a year and a half. I can't remember, 64,000 64,000 miles around the world during its journey without ever laying into port, because the whole idea was to basically keep stealthiness and radio silence, essentially. Basically, they would eavesdrop on people, but they never sent out communication in a year and a half. So even the German state had no idea, really what it was going on. Basically, everyone just had to follow newspaper clippings of basically sort of all the destruction that lay in the Wolf's wake. But yeah, it was definitely not an easy ride. Lots of shortages on rations, so fuel, all that sort of thing. Plus, Captain Nerger was kind of the old shores type, where he followed the prize rules, where he basically took on prisoners and gave them a chance to surrender before scuttling their ships, which he did. The only problem was he captured so many ships that there were so many prisoners on board that it was just there was just too much going on, and so in a way he was detrimented by his own success. But I felt this was a really good, well-written history account of a really cool incident in World War I. 4 out of 5 stars as well. Alright, next class was Astronomy, and I got, let's see, Exceeded Expectation. The first one I read was Origins, because it had stars on the cover, by Neil deGrasse Tyson. And this was boring as F, basically. I know, I've tried 2 of his books now, thinking they'd be funnier or better. I don't know. I learned a lot, but it really was just really dry. Just kind of like your standard astronomy book, I guess, space science book, I guess. I didn't really enjoy it that much. But 3 out of 5 stars to Origins. And then the second challenge I completed was to read a book with Sky in the title. And I actually read a YA book for once. I read Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young, just because I'd seen this going around quite a bit. And it's sort of like Norse inspired. It's not really, it doesn't really come out as Viking, but obviously you can definitely see the Viking influence there. I thought it was okay. YA, really just isn't my thing, I guess. But there were no love triangles, so that was definitely a positive. I know that's like a big trope that like happens in YA books. That definitely was not the case in this one. But we do have like a strong young female character, which is actually pretty refreshing. A lot of time in fantasy, so that was definitely a bonus. It did keep my interest, and the plot does move along quite well. I just felt that basically the whole world is basically these 2 or 3 tribes, so it just felt kind of small, to be honest. But other than that, I still thought it was pretty good. I think I'm going to give Sky in the Deep 4 out of 5 stars as well. And for the next class, Care of Magical Creatures, and I got an outstanding in that one. The first book I read, or I should say listened to, was You Are Now Less Dumb. I can't remember who it's by because I hated it so much I didn't even bother to look it up. I think it was like Stephen McRaney or something like that. This literally just felt like an undergrad who just got his BS in psychology or whatever, and he's just going around picking on people with like, you know, these like little psychological like tidbits and why people think certain things or why they behave certain ways or things like that. He has like tons of like little case studies and research and stuff that shows like this and that. Most of the time it's common sense, like when you think about it. A lot of time it just felt like he was just trying to like puff up his chest or something. It was just really weird. I didn't care for it at all. There was only like one chapter in one sort of psychological principle that I actually enjoyed like listening to because it's something I'd never heard of, and it didn't come across like quite as bad as the other chapters. But other than that, I really didn't care for this book. I'm only gonna give it 2.5 out of 5 stars. And then for an outstanding, I had to read a book that includes a dragon, and I read my edition of Beowulf in my British Myths and Legends Folio Society edition, as you can see. And also, I don't know in the video if you can see, I've been doing my unhaul, and there's quite a few books missing from the library. That gives you guys a hint. But anyways, I believe this was the Kevin Crosley Holland translation, which I think is probably the best. A lot of people read the Seamus Heaney one, which is okay too, but I think he's a little more liberal with his translation, I guess you could say. But Beowulf is just a great epic poem. If you want to read sort of like epic poetry or medieval poetry, that'd be a good place to start because it's not too long from what we have left of Beowulf. It's only like a 3 or 4 hour read. So, and it's just really exciting. I like it. It's one of my favorite medieval texts. So 5 out of 5 stars for Beowulf. Alright, so now let's move on to Charms, and I got an outstanding in this class as well. And the first book was To Read a Book with Magic, and I read the first book in the listened to the Song for No Man's Land, which is the first book in the Song for No Man's Land trilogy. This is just the second book. It was a World War I fantasy, which is why I picked it up in the first place, but let's see, how do I say it? There was a lot of flashbacks, I guess, from the main character's childhood, and those were kind of convoluted, and you really don't have any idea, like, really what's going on. It just didn't really seem to mesh well with, like, the story that was going on contemporaneously. And the actual part of the World War I part that's set in the current time period, well, the current time period of the novel, I thought that was actually pretty well done. I did like the characterizations and sort of the different facets of the people that fought in World War I and how it affected them differently. I thought that was really well done. But yeah, sort of the magical elements, basically there's these things that are hunting the main character, like throughout the trenches and the battlefields and stuff, and they're basically originated from his childhood. It's really not clear what is going on, to be honest, so I'm probably going to read it, the second book, just because it's so short. Maybe that'll clarify things a little bit better, but I'm only going to give Song for No Man's Land 3 out of 5 stars. Alright, the next book, I don't know what I did with it. I must have moved it somewhere, but it's Rescued by Peter Zoitlin. I'll put a picture right there. And it was because it was the challenge was to read a book with a cover that charmed you, and if that cover doesn't charm you, then I don't know, you have something wrong with you, I guess. But basically, this book is all about Peter Zoitland, the author's basically personal story of his rescue dog, basically. And he never had a dog as a pet until he was, I want to say, his kids were were in college, I believe. So I mean, he was, I think, in his early 50s at that point in the book. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting like take on things, and it was basically just sort of his basically take on how your life changes, like when you have a rescue animal, things of that nature. So it's a pretty straightforward book. It doesn't like really break a ton of new ground per se, but it's just short and sweet, and it was like basically like the cover. It was a charming little book. 4 out of 5 stars to rescue. And the last book was to read a book that will leave a mark. And I read Soul of an Octopus, A Surprising Exploration into the Wonder of Consciousness by Cy Montgomery. I'd heard really, really good things about this one. That's just why I picked this one for that challenge. I won't say I was disappointed with the book. I guess I was expecting a little bit more. It was still a really good book. I just felt there wasn't that much meat to it, I guess, like with more like science and research and stuff. It was really more just sort of a memoir of Cy Montgomery's basically experiences with these like really cool octopuses that, and the people that worked with them, and basically her experiences with them. But it just, I don't know, it was really good, and she's a great writer, and I'm going to pick up a lot of her other books because of this book. It just didn't blow me away as I was expecting it to, I guess. And I don't know, I've read 2 books now on like consciousnesses in octopuses and souls of octopuses and stuff. I don't know, the other one was a little bit too sciencey. Like there was really nothing to. It was mostly all just like science and research and stuff. This one was almost all just like emotional pulling, basically. So I need to find one that kind of meshes them a little bit better. I don't know, but I'm still giving Soul of an Octopus a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Alright, Defense Against the Dark Arts was the only class that I failed to even get an acceptable in, so that's really sad, but let's just keep going. Alright, so let's move on to Divination. I got an acceptable by reading a book set in the future, and it was the first book of Jack Vance's Tales of the Dying Earth, which is also just called The Dying Earth. And it's so far in the future, the sun has become basically a red giant star, and this has a lot of magic to sort of creep back into existence for whatever reason. And it was kind of a quirky, like, kind of pulpy, cool book. And as you guys know, if you follow my channel, I really like pulp fantasy, pulp fiction. I just really enjoy the short story format, I guess. And Soph is moving the camera like usual, but basically the short stories are actually fairly interconnected with each other and kind of almost like a chronological order. They're not really dependent on each other per se, but there were a lot of characters that kind of seep over into other ones, so I thought that was kind of cool, and it just was a really unique kind of take on sci-fi and fantasy. It was just a really cool, it's like vintage 50s fantasy. I just really enjoyed it, and I'm going to be continuing on with Eyes of the Overworld. Sorry about that. I'm giving Dying Earth 4 out of 5 stars. Alright, let's go on to Herbology. I got an acceptable by reading a book with green on the cover. And I decided to read a National Geographic Society book. This is one of their kind of older vintage ones from the 90s, I believe. And it's Our Inviting Eastern Parklands from Acadia to the Everglades. And basically it just goes through 8 different national parks on the eastern seaboard of the United States. In particular, I wanted to read it about Acadia National Park, which is in the state of Maine where I live. So I thought it was pretty cool. It was really detailed. Some were more detailed than others, but I did learn quite a bit. Obviously the photographs are spectacular, as National Geographic is known to do. But there was a lot of cool national parks in Florida too that I learned about, which is a state I used to live in when I was younger. So I really enjoyed it. It was just a fun little National Geographic read, and I just really enjoyed like all the vignettes and stuff of like the locals and the researchers and scientists who either live or work in the parks that were described. So I thought it was really good. So 4 out of 4 or 4.5 out of 5 stars. I can't remember exactly what I put it down as. Alright, we're getting there. History of Magic is the next class, and I got Exceeded Expectations. The first one is a book that would fit in the Hogwarts library. I picked one of these Our Debt to Greece and Rome books because the spine has like little portraits of Greeks and Romans on coins, which I thought was kind of cool. This one is The Poetics of Aristotle, Its Meaning and Influence by Lane Cooper, and I highly advise you not to read it unless you're writing like a doctoral thesis on the Poetics of Aristotle. The first half was pretty good. It was just basically dealing with basically kind of a summarization, spark notes kind of on the Poetics of Aristotle, which was good. The second half was literally just anyone who has ever done research or wrote on the Poetics of Aristotle from basically ancient times, which actually was pretty cool. From ancient times to medieval times, it was kind of interesting to see who was studying and writing about Aristotle. But then once you hit the Renaissance, literally there's just like hundreds of names that no one has ever heard of before, like unless you're like an Aristotelian scholar or something. There's just so much going on, like all these scholars of the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, and like what they wrote and kind of their ivory tower arguments and stuff, and it was just blah, blah, basically. So I'm only giving this book 2.5 out of 5 stars. And that might have been my fault not really knowing what it was going into it, but you know. Alright, next book is a book posted at least 5 years ago, and I read The Trojan War by Barry Strauss, and I read The Death of Caesar, and I really, really enjoyed it, by the same author, earlier this year in March. So I wanted to read another one by him, since that was the first time I'd read something. But this one did not live up to The Death of Caesar. To be honest, like I think I've recorded the video, but I haven't edited it yet. I think I basically call this Homeric fan fiction. He literally, I don't know, it was not good. I don't know. There were some good parts that were kind of interspersed throughout the work, but literally the majority of the book is basically just going through like Homer's Iliad and basically writing like a more like kind of clear and concise commentary on like what was actually happening with the like legit characters and like legit places, and basically the exact same thing that they were doing in the Iliad is basically what he's saying is happening in the Trojan War. And every now and then he goes, well, of course we don't actually know if this was true, but it's just awkward reading. To be honest, I did not enjoy it. I think I'm only going to give the Trojan War 3 out of 5 stars. Alright, and now we go on to Muggle Studies, which I got acceptable in, and I read, a book by a favorite author. And I really like Victor Davis Hanson. He writes a lot of books on basically ancient Greece. And I had this one up there somewhere. It's Wars of the Ancient Greeks, and I thought it was really kind of neat. It's not too long, but there's actually still quite a bit of meat to the text, to be honest. But also lots of great photographs and maps and figures and stuff. And what was interesting is he does not like Alexander the Great that much, which is actually pretty interesting because I actually don't care for Alexander that much, to be honest. Everyone talks about how great a general is and stuff, but overall Alexander was just basically a psycho, which is good that he pointed a lot of Alexander's flaws out. But he also, he just deals with the Dark Ages of Greek history, which is about 1200 to 700, basically after the fall of the Mycenaeans to the rise, sort of, the Persian Wars, which is kind of really dark and mysterious and stuff. And he enlightened that quite a bit, which I thought was pretty good. Lots of unique, or not, maybe not unique, lots of like really detailed information, I guess you could say. You know, like what they did, how they actually went about doing it, what they wore, how they went on campaigns, stuff like that. That was really good. I'm going to give Wars of the Ancient Greeks 4.5 out of 5 stars. And let's go on to the next class, which is Potions, and it was to read a book with a color in the title. So I read In the Wake of the Plague, The Black Death in the World It Made by Norman Cantor. And he was a pretty prominent medieval historian. I already did a book review of this one, a video of it. I'll leave that linked up below as well. I didn't really like it. Though, apparently from what I've learned, a lot of the problems I had with the book were basically because it was sort of rushed through the editing process and stuff, because I think it was published like the year of his death or right after he died or something, posthumously. So a lot of the problems I had with the book, it might not have been fully completed, maybe, the original manuscript. So that's what I'm going to go with and give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'll probably read some of his other works, because he was a fairly prominent medieval historian and writer. But yeah, this one just had a lot of like kind of factual, maybe not errors, but I don't know, I'm going to say there were some factual errors in there. But also, it literally just went on so many tangents. Like, the main narrative could have been like 50 pages, and then like we're going on, it's like 250 because he adds like all this other like random stuff. it's not that there's like that many per se, but it's the ones he has going for 5, 6, 7 pages at a time, and then you forget, oh yeah, this is a book on like the aftermath of the Black Death, right? And then you're like, why would that be again? And then so I don't know. Or maybe I was a little too harsh on it, but I'm giving In the Wake of the Plague, he was either 2.5 or 3 out of 5 stars. And lastly, for Transfiguration was the rated book with a gray cover, and I read the Calvary Lance. And this one is by Alan Larson and illustrated by Henry Yallop. And this is one of the Osprey Publishing books I've shown you guys before, and I'll show you guys again pretty much every time I do it. Basically, the full unique illustrations commissioned by each book, basically, and how accurate they are to whatever they're talking about. Literally down to like the buttons on like their suits and their coats and everything is probably accurate. So that's the thing with these books, is they're just super detailed, super informative. And this is basically obviously all about the Calvary Lance. I was a little disappointed that it didn't cover much on like ancient, pretty much nothing on ancient through medieval lances. It was all sort of basically from like the mid 1700s to the end of the lance in basically throughout World War One. I was kind of wanting like some medieval and ancient stuff thrown in there too, but it's literally modern cavalry lances. But it was definitely really interesting, lots of cool tidbits. I mean, it gets a little detailed and monotonous, like going through the measurements of every single like lance that different countries put out during, like, say, World War One, for example. But there was some cool stuff, and actually one of the tidbits I learned I was really intrigued about was basically how, maybe not often, but how an infantry square, which is usually heralded as sort of the the anti-cavalry formation, where they fix bayonets and form a square, and cavalry won't charge spear points and stuff, so the square is basically invincible against a cavalry charge. He basically even just in this narrative, which really wasn't focusing too much on, not like a ton on individual tactic maneuvers and stuff, but basically how many times the square was actually broken by cavalry charges. So I thought that was kind of interesting, to be honest about it. I really enjoyed this one. This is the first weapon book in the Osprey Publishing series that I've read, and I can't remember what number it is, number 59. So I'm definitely going to be checking out some of these other ones and see what they have for sale. So there you guys have it. Those are the 17 books I read in August. I know this one kind of dragged out quite some time. Overall, it really wasn't that great of a reading month, and the quality, I guess, a lot of, I don't think a single 5-star read, lots of 3s and some sub-3 books, which is not good. It was just a lot of kind of meh, in the middle of the road kind of stuff, to be honest, but, everyone has those months, I guess. So just tell me what you guys think. Tell me how you guys did, if you guys participated in the notes, and if you didn't, just tell me what you guys read in the month of August. I'd be glad to hear about it. If you guys have read any of these, or have any questions or comments about them, leave those down below. I got to talk about that. And also, just one more time, one little plug for the Etsy shop that I started. I got some cool things on there, I think. I got some Elder Futhark words on bookmarks, a couple different kinds of hardwoods, some Norse things. I'm going to be putting out some Greek stuff, and hopefully in just a little bit. Also got some little plaques and symbols and stuff like that, and the zodiac signs I showed you obviously earlier. Just go check it out if that sounds interesting to you, or you like bookmarks. That'd be really cool. Even if you just like or favorite the shop or items in the shop, that would definitely mean a lot to me. But anyways, whatever you guys end up reading, always remember, read victoriously.